Rain taps softly against the glass. The year is 1938, though the story truly starts earlier, on the final day of 1926. In a narrow room inside Wool's orphanage in London, a young woman named Merope Gaunt gives birth to a son on December 31st and dies shortly afterward. Before her death, she chooses a name, Tom Marvolo Riddle. Tom comes from the child's father, Tom Riddle Sr. Marvolo comes from her own father, Marvolo Gaunt. It is a name carrying two bloodlines that could hardly be more different, though the infant lying in the orphanage nursery knows nothing of either one. Outside, winter presses against the city, and inside, a newborn child enters the world, entirely alone. Why did Merope Gaunt, a witch descended from Salazar Slytherin himself, leave her son with nothing but a name? The question lingers over every account of Tom Riddle's early life. Canon tells us that Merope had escaped the cruel household of the Gaunts, and that Tom Riddle Sr. had abandoned her after learning the truth behind their relationship. Years later, Albus Dumbledore would conclude that Merope had lost the desire to continue living, though whether through heartbreak, exhaustion, or despair remains uncertain. What is known is that she arrived at the orphanage weak and impoverished. Mrs. Cole, the matron who later spoke with Dumbledore, remembered the event clearly. Merope named the baby, held him briefly, and died within the hour. The last living descendant of Salazar Slytherin left behind a child who inherited her bloodline but none of her affection. Wool's orphanage was not a magical place. There were no moving portraits on the walls, no enchanted ceilings overhead, no owls arriving with letters. The building smelled of boiled cabbage, soap, damp clothing, and old wood. Children slept in rows of beds and followed strict routines shaped by necessity rather than kindness. Tom Riddle grew up surrounded by ordinary muggles who had no explanation for the strange things that happened around him. He never knew his mother. He never met his father. No wizard arrived to tell him that his ancestors included some of the oldest pure-blood families in Britain. For years, he possessed only a surname and a growing certainty that he was different from everyone else. The most remarkable detail about young Tom is not that he displayed accidental magic. Many wizarding children do. Harry Potter vanished the glass at the reptile house before he knew he was a wizard. Neville Longbottom bounced after being dropped from a window. What makes Tom unusual is the degree of awareness he seemed to possess. According to Mrs. Cole's memories, he did not merely experience strange events around him. He appeared to understand that he was causing them. Long before he reached Hogwarts, he had begun connecting his intentions to the effects that followed. He learned that fear could be useful. He learned that people could be manipulated. Most importantly, he learned that being different granted him a form of power. Why were the other children afraid of him? Mrs. Cole never fully understood. She could only describe the pattern. Objects disappeared. Arguments ended with one child terrified and another strangely triumphant. Small incidents accumulated until a reputation formed around the quiet boy with dark hair and watchful eyes. Tom rarely lost control of his temper in public. He did not throw dramatic tantrums or attract attention through chaos. Instead, he observed, he listened. He stored information away and used it later. Even before learning magic, he was developing habits that would define the rest of his life. One of the most disturbing stories from the orphanage involved a seaside trip. During a visit to the coast, two fellow orphans accompanied Tom into a cave near the shoreline. Canon never reveals exactly what happened inside. Mrs. Cole remembered only that the children emerged, frightened and changed. They refused to discuss the experience. Years later, when Dumbledore heard this story, he paid close attention to it. The detail matters because Tom would later return to that same cave after leaving Hogwarts. There, he transformed it into one of the most heavily protected hiding places in wizarding history, concealing a Horcrux within a basin surrounded by dark enchantments. The cave clearly held meaning for him long before he became Voldemort. The silence surrounding that cave creates one of the great mysteries of Tom Riddle's childhood. Canon leaves the event unexplained, and the absence of answers almost makes it more unsettling. Some readers believe Tom merely frightened the children through accidental magic. Others suspect he was already experimenting with cruelty, testing how much fear he could create and how completely he could control another person's emotions. Whatever occurred, it happened years before he entered Hogwarts. No dark arts textbook guided him, no Death Eater stood beside him. The impulses were already there, emerging naturally from the child himself. Tom also developed a habit of collecting trophies. Mrs. Cole told Dumbledore that various items belonging to other children somehow ended up hidden among Tom's possessions. A yo-yo, a silver thimble, small objects with little practical value. To an ordinary thief, such items would seem pointless. Yet Tom kept them. The pattern would repeat throughout his life. As an adult, he became fascinated by significant magical artifacts. Helga Hufflepuff's cup, Salazar Slytherin's locket, Rowena Ravenclaw's diadem. Even before he understood his heritage, he was gathering objects connected to personal victories and domination. The habit began in the orphanage, with trinkets taken from frightened children. The orphanage records reveal another curious contradiction. Tom was intelligent, disciplined, and outwardly well-behaved. Adults generally regarded him as polite. He followed rules when it suited him. He performed his tasks competently. This public image would later become one of his greatest weapons at Hogwarts. Teachers admired him. Students respected him. Yet beneath the surface, another reality existed. The same boy who spoke calmly to authority figures was secretly terrifying his peers. The same child who appeared self-controlled was already nurturing a profound belief that he stood above those around him. As the years passed, Tom became increasingly obsessed with one question. Who were his parents? He knew only fragments. His father had supposedly abandoned him. His mother was dead. The surname Riddle sounded ordinary, and Tom hated ordinary things. He searched for clues wherever he could find them. When no answers appeared, he began constructing explanations of his own. If he possessed powers that nobody else had, then surely his parents must have been special. If he was different, then his origins had to be different as well. The uncertainty gnawed at him. Long before he sought immortality, Tom Riddle was searching for identity. By the summer of 1938, he was 11 years old. Europe stood on the edge of war. The streets of London carried an undercurrent of tension that even children could sense. Inside Wool's orphanage, daily routines continued as always. Beds were made, meals were served, rain drummed against windows, much as it had on countless evenings before. Then one day a visitor arrived asking to speak with Tom Riddle. He was tall, bearded, and dressed in unusual clothing. His name was Albus Dumbledore, and before the sun set, the lonely boy from Wool's orphanage would finally learn why strange things followed wherever he went. The meeting would change the course of wizarding history, though neither of them yet understood how much depended on the conversation about to take place behind a simple orphanage door. Why did 11-year-old Tom Riddle react to the wizarding world with satisfaction rather than wonder? Most magical children who first hear about Hogwarts are astonished. Harry Potter stared in disbelief when Hagrid explained who he was. Even Hermione Granger, who had eagerly read every textbook before arriving at school, approached magic with excitement and curiosity. Tom's response was different. When Albus Dumbledore entered Wool's orphanage in the summer of 1938 and informed him that he was a wizard, the boy did not ask whether magic was real. He already believed it was. Instead, he immediately demanded confirmation that he was special. The meeting survives through Dumbledore's memory, preserved years later in the Pensieve. Tom initially assumed the visitor was some kind of doctor or investigator. When Dumbledore explained that he represented Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, Tom's suspicion shifted into intense focus. He described how strange things happened whenever he wanted them to happen. He explained that he could make people hurt if he wished. He spoke about influencing animals. He recounted these experiences not with embarrassment, but with pride. Dumbledore quickly realized that this was not a frightened child seeking answers. It was a child who had already concluded that power justified itself. The conversation revealed another trait that would remain with Tom for the rest of his life: his instinct to dominate every interaction. He demanded proof that Dumbledore was truly magical. Dumbledore responded by setting a wardrobe ablaze and extinguishing the flames moments later without damage. The display was controlled and brief, but it carried a message. For perhaps the first time in his life, Tom encountered someone whose power exceeded his own. The encounter fascinated him. Throughout the years that followed, Dumbledore would remain one of the few individuals Tom could neither manipulate nor intimidate. The most revealing moment came when Dumbledore confronted him about the stolen possessions hidden in his room. Among Tom's belongings were items taken from other children at the orphanage. Dumbledore knew exactly where they were. He instructed Tom to return them. The boy's reaction was immediate and defensive. For an instant, the polished mask disappeared, revealing anger beneath it. Yet he complied. The exchange established a pattern that would echo across decades of wizarding history. Dumbledore recognized darkness within Tom long before anyone else, and Tom recognized that Dumbledore could see through him. A few weeks later, Tom Riddle entered a world he had spent his entire childhood imagining. The Hogwarts Express carried him north from London to Scotland. Beyond the train windows stretched fields, villages, and distant hills. At the journey's end stood Hogwarts Castle, ancient and immense, beside the Black Lake. Towers rose against the evening sky. Hundreds of candles floated above long tables. In the great hall, ghosts drifted through stone walls. For most first years, the sight was overwhelming. For Tom, it was confirmation. He had always believed he belonged somewhere greater than Wool's orphanage. Now he had found that place. Why was Slytherin House such a perfect fit For Tom Riddle, the Sorting Hat barely hesitated. Slytherin valued ambition, resourcefulness, determination, and a willingness to pursue greatness. Tom possessed all of these qualities in abundance. Unlike many future Death Eaters, however, he did not arrive at Hogwarts with pure-blood prejudices already ingrained. He had grown up among Muggles. His hatred developed later, shaped by discoveries about his family and by his own need to reject anything he associated with weakness. At 11, he entered Slytherin not because he despised Muggles, but because he craved distinction. Tom quickly became one of the most gifted students Hogwarts had seen in generations. Teachers admired his intelligence. He excelled academically across nearly every subject. Charms, transfiguration, potions, and defense against the dark arts seemed to come naturally to him. He possessed extraordinary magical control and an intense work ethic. Unlike students who relied purely on talent, Tom studied relentlessly. He wanted mastery, not competence. The combination of brilliance and discipline made him exceptional. Professor Horace Slughorn soon counted Tom among the prized members of the Slug Club. Slughorn collected talented students the way others collected rare magical artifacts. He recognized promise early and enjoyed surrounding himself with future leaders, innovators, and influential witches and wizards. Tom fit perfectly into this circle. Polite, handsome, articulate, and seemingly modest, he knew exactly how to impress adults. Slughorn later admitted that he'd been deeply fond of the boy. The admission carried a note of sadness because he eventually understood how completely he had been deceived. Tom's classmates often saw only the image he wished them to see. He was courteous, he was calm, he rarely displayed open hostility. Students admired him, and younger pupils looked up to him. Yet even during these early years, he began gathering a circle of followers. Names such as Avery, Rosier, Mulciber, and Lestrange would later appear among families associated with Voldemort's rise. Not all of these relationships are documented in detail, but Dumbledore observed that Tom already attracted companions who admired strength and enjoyed exerting power over others. He was learning that influence could be more useful than fear alone. The castle itself became another teacher. Hogwarts was filled with secrets waiting to be uncovered. Hidden passages wound through the walls. Ancient legends lingered in classrooms and corridors. The founders of the school seemed almost alive through their houses and traditions. Tom absorbed every fragment of history he could find, while other students worried about Quidditch matches or holiday plans. He spent increasing amounts of time researching the past. He was especially drawn to stories connected to Salazar Slytherin, the founder whose reputation remained both admired and feared centuries after his death. Why did the mystery of Salazar Slytherin grip Tom more strongly than anything else at Hogwarts? Part of the answer lies in identity. Tom had spent his childhood searching for his origins. At Hogwarts, he finally encountered a historical figure whose story seemed to call directly to him. Salazar Slytherin had possessed the rare gift of Parseltongue, the ability to speak with snakes. Tom soon discovered that he shared this ability. For most wizards, Parseltongue was extraordinarily uncommon. Within British magical history, it was closely associated with Slytherin's bloodline. The discovery suggested that the answers Tom wanted might be hidden somewhere within the castle itself. As the years passed, Tom's reputation continued to grow. He earned excellent marks. Professors praised his work. Students respected him. Eventually, he became a prefect, a position reflecting both academic success and apparent responsibility. Looking back, the achievement feels almost impossible. The future Lord Voldemort was not hiding in the shadows as a neglected outcast. He was standing in plain sight as one of Hogwarts' greatest success stories. That contradiction remains one of the most unsettling truths about his youth. Yet beneath the admiration and awards, another search was unfolding. Tom was no longer satisfied with knowing that he was magical. He wanted to know precisely who he was. Somewhere in the castle's ancient history lay clues about his family. Somewhere in the records of the wizarding world existed the explanation for his unusual gifts. And before long, he would uncover a secret hidden for nearly 1,000 years, a secret involving Salazar Slytherin, a monster beneath Hogwarts, and a chamber that many believed existed only in legend. Why did a legend that had defeated generations of students suddenly yield its secrets to a teenager? For centuries, the story of the Chamber of Secrets existed somewhere between history and myth. According to Hogwarts tradition, Salazar Slytherin had constructed a hidden chamber within the castle before departing after his dispute with the other founders. The tale claimed that only Slytherin's true heir could open it. Inside waited a terrible creature that would one day purge the school of those Slytherin considered unworthy of magical education. Most students treated the story as folklore. Tom Riddle did not. He treated it as a puzzle waiting to be solved. By his 5th year, around 1942 and 1943, Tom had already discovered something that linked him directly to the founder. He could speak Parseltongue. Snakes responded to him instinctively. The realization transformed an old legend into a personal challenge. If the chamber truly existed, then he was uniquely positioned to find it. Hogwarts was enormous, containing moving staircases, forgotten classrooms, sealed corridors, and passages unknown even to many teachers. Tom devoted himself to the search. The castle that had become his home also became his laboratory. Canon never describes every step that led him to the entrance, but the destination is known. Hidden within Moaning Myrtle's bathroom lay the doorway to the Chamber of Secrets. A carved snake concealed the mechanism. When commanded in Parseltongue, the sink opened and revealed a vast passage, descending deep beneath the castle. Tom had succeeded where centuries of witches and wizards had failed. He had not merely uncovered a secret room, he had discovered proof that he was connected to Salazar Slytherin himself. For a boy obsessed with identity, the discovery must have felt almost intoxicating. The chamber was unlike any ordinary part of Hogwarts. Far beneath the castle stretched a cavernous hall lined with towering stone serpents. Massive pillars disappeared into darkness overhead. At the far end stood an enormous statue of Salazar Slytherin, its face carved with stern authority. The scale alone conveyed a message. This was not a hidden classroom or forgotten storage space. It was a monument. Every stone reinforced the idea that the heir who stood there belonged to something ancient and powerful. Inside the chamber waited the creature described in legend, a basilisk. The books confirm that Slytherin had concealed the giant serpent there roughly 1,000 years earlier. A basilisk is among the most dangerous magical creatures in existence. Created through dark methods involving a chicken egg hatched beneath a toad, it possesses a gaze capable of causing instant death. Even indirect contact through reflections can result in petrification. The monster Tom encountered had survived for centuries beneath Hogwarts. Through Parseltongue, he could command it. Why did Tom choose to unleash the basilisk at all? The practical explanation is simple. He accepted the ideology attached to Slytherin's legacy. The Chamber's purpose was to target Muggle-born students. Yet there was something deeper at work. Tom had spent years searching for proof that he was exceptional. Opening the chamber validated everything he believed about himself. It confirmed that he was not merely another talented student. He was the heir to a founder of Hogwarts. The temptation to exercise that power proved irresistible. The victim was Myrtle Warren, a Ravenclaw student who would later become known as Moaning Myrtle. One evening in 1943, Myrtle was hiding in the bathroom after being teased by another student, Olive Hornby. While standing near the sinks, she heard a boy speaking in a language she did not recognize. Annoyed, she emerged from her stall to tell him to leave. The next thing she saw was a pair of enormous yellow eyes. Myrtle died instantly. Her death became the first known murder committed by Tom Riddle. The significance of Myrtle's death reaches far beyond the tragedy itself. Canon confirms that Tom used the murder to create his first Horcrux. The object chosen was an ordinary diary. Through one of the darkest branches of magic, known to wizard kind, he split his soul and anchored a fragment of it inside the book. Years later, that same diary would manipulate Ginny Weasley and reopen the chamber. At the time, however, nobody knew what had truly happened. Hogwarts only knew that a student had been killed. Fear spread quickly through the castle. Parents worried, rumors multiplied. Some officials even considered closing Hogwarts. The school had survived wars, political upheaval, and centuries of change, but a mysterious monster killing students threatened its future. For Tom, the crisis created a problem. He wanted the chamber open, yet he did not want to lose Hogwarts. More than any other place in the world, the castle mattered to him. It was home. If the school closed, he would be forced to return permanently to Wool's orphanage. The solution he chose revealed the extraordinary coldness already developing within him. Rather than abandon his plans, he found someone else to blame. The target was Rubeus Hagrid, then a third-year student. Hagrid possessed a fascination with magical creatures that often exceeded common sense. Hidden within the castle, he was secretly raising an acromantula named Aragog. Acromantulas are giant, intelligent spiders classified as highly dangerous. To frightened authorities searching for answers, the discovery appeared convincing. Tom presented Hagrid as the culprit. Why did so many people accept the accusation? Partly because the evidence seemed to fit. Aragog was unquestionably dangerous. Hagrid had undeniably concealed the creature within the school. Most importantly, Tom Riddle's word carried enormous weight. Teachers trusted him. Students admired him. He was already regarded as one of Hogwarts' brightest pupils. When he identified Hagrid as responsible, few people questioned his conclusion. The contrast is striking. A future Death Eater leader successfully framed a future member of the Order of the Phoenix while both were still children. The consequences were severe. Hagrid was expelled from Hogwarts. His wand was snapped. Only the intervention of Headmaster Armando Dippet and later Albus Dumbledore, prevented him from being completely cast out of the magical world. Aragog escaped into the Forbidden Forest, where he eventually established a colony that survived for decades. Meanwhile, Tom received recognition for helping solve the crisis. The very person responsible for Myrtle's death was praised for supposedly protecting the school. It remains one of the most successful deceptions in wizarding history. Yet even as teachers congratulated him, Tom's ambitions were already moving beyond the chamber. The diary Horcrux marked a turning point. Murder had not horrified him. It had empowered him. He had discovered a method to challenge mortality itself, and the experience left him hungry for more knowledge. Somewhere within Hogwarts stood another figure who possessed answers he needed. Professor Horace Slughorn. Tom would soon ask him a question so disturbing that even decades later, Slughorn would struggle to remember it without shame. The subject was not the Chamber of Secrets. It was something far worse. It was the possibility of tearing a human soul apart again and again. Why would a brilliant 16-year-old student become obsessed not with power, wealth, or political influence, but with the mechanics of escaping death itself? By the time Tom Riddle entered his later years at Hogwarts, he had already opened the Chamber of Secrets, controlled a basilisk, committed murder, and created a Horcrux. Most of the castle knew nothing about these achievements. To professors and classmates, he remained the exceptional student whose future seemed limitless. Yet behind that polished exterior, a profound fear had begun guiding many of his decisions. Tom Riddle was fascinated by immortality, not symbolic immortality through fame or accomplishment, but literal survival beyond death. The key figure in this chapter is Professor Horace Slughorn. As head of Slytherin House and Potions Master, Slughorn possessed extensive knowledge of magical history. More importantly, he enjoyed mentoring talented students. Tom quickly became one of his favorites. Their conversations often extended beyond ordinary classroom topics into obscure corners of magical theory. Slughorn appreciated intellectual curiosity, and Tom knew exactly how to present himself as an eager learner seeking guidance. What Slughorn failed to recognize was that Tom's questions were rarely academic. They were practical. One evening during a gathering of the Slug Club, Tom arranged a private conversation. The memory survives because Dumbledore later recovered it and shared it with Harry Potter. In that conversation, Tom raised the subject of Horcruxes. Even before reaching adulthood, he had already researched them extensively. He knew that creating a Horcrux required murder. He understood that the process involved splitting the soul. Yet one question remained unanswered. How many times could such a division occur? The question shocked Slughorn. Horcruxes were among the darkest forms of magic known to wizarding society. Even discussing them made many witches and wizards uncomfortable. Slughorn attempted to explain the theory while discouraging further interest. Then Tom asked something unprecedented. Instead of creating a single Horcrux, what would happen if someone created multiple Horcruxes? Specifically, what about 7 pieces of soul? Slughorn was horrified. The number itself mattered because 7 was considered the most powerfully magical number in wizarding tradition. Tom was not asking whether Horcruxes existed. He was exploring how far the concept could be pushed. Why did Tom choose the number 7? Canon never provides a direct answer, but several clues point in the same direction. Throughout magical history, 7 carried symbolic significance. Hogwarts contained 7 years of education. There were 7 players on a Quidditch team. Many magical systems and traditions emphasize the number repeatedly. Tom, who studied magical lore obsessively, certainly understood these associations. To him, dividing his soul into 7 parts may have represented not merely survival, but perfection. Death would no longer be a threat if pieces of him remained hidden throughout the world. The conversation left Slughorn deeply unsettled. Years later, shame drove him to alter the memory, attempting to conceal what he had told Tom. Yet the altered version only highlighted how serious the discussion had been. Slughorn knew that information alone does not create evil. Countless students learn dangerous facts without acting upon them. What disturbed him was the intensity with which Tom pursued the topic. The young wizard sitting before him was not treating immortality as a philosophical question. He was building a plan. Around the same period, another mystery occupied Tom's attention. He still did not know the truth about his parents. Hogwarts had given him power and purpose, but it had not answered the question that had haunted him since childhood. Why had his mother died? Why had his father abandoned him? The surname Riddle continued to irritate him. It sounded ordinary. Worse, it sounded Muggle. As Tom grew increasingly proud of his magical abilities, he became determined to uncover the story behind his birth. The search eventually led him into the records of the wizarding world. Exactly how he pieced the puzzle together remains unclear, but the outcome is known. Tom discovered the existence of the Gaunt family. The Gaunts were an ancient pure-blood line that traced its ancestry directly to Salazar Slytherin. By the early 20th century, however, the family had fallen into poverty and isolation. Marvolo Gaunt, Tom's grandfather, lived in a crumbling shack near the village of Little Hangleton. His children were Merope and Morphin Gaunt. For the first time, Tom found evidence that one side of his heritage was extraordinary. The discovery answered some questions while creating others. If his mother came from the Gaunts, then she had carried one of the most famous bloodlines in wizarding history. She'd also possessed the gift of Parseltongue, explaining Tom's own ability. Yet the name Riddle remained. The more Tom investigated, the more he learned about Tom Riddle Sr., the wealthy Muggle who had lived near the Gaunt family estate. Eventually he uncovered the truth. His father had not died before birth. He had left. Why did this revelation affect Tom so deeply? After all, he had spent his entire life without either parent, yet the details mattered. Tom learned that his father had rejected Merope. In his eyes, the abandonment became proof of weakness and betrayal. Worse still, his father was a Muggle. Tom had spent years constructing an identity around being exceptional. Now he discovered that half of his ancestry came from a man who possessed no magical ability whatsoever. The knowledge clashed violently with the image he wanted of himself. Many readers notice a contradiction here. Tom later became obsessed with blood purity, yet he himself was a half-blood. The contradiction is real, and it helps explain much about his psychology. Voldemort's hatred of Muggles was never rooted purely in ideology. It was deeply personal. His father represented abandonment, humiliation, and vulnerability. Every reminder of that connection threatened the identity Tom had carefully built. Rather than accept both sides of his heritage, he embraced one and attempted to erase the other. By his final years at Hogwarts, Tom had become head boy, one of the highest honors available to a student. The achievement seems almost unbelievable when viewed through the lens of later events. The future Dark Lord wore the badge of a model student. Professors praised his leadership. Younger students admired him. Visitors to the castle would have seen a young wizard destined for greatness. In a sense, they were correct. They simply misunderstood the nature of that greatness. Meanwhile, another transformation was taking place. Tom no longer viewed himself merely as Tom Riddle. The name increasingly felt inadequate. It tied him to a father he despised and a childhood he wished to forget. Somewhere in his private thoughts, a new identity was beginning to form. The change would not happen overnight. It would emerge gradually through ambition, resentment, and obsession. But the first steps had already been taken. Soon after leaving Hogwarts, Tom would travel to a small village called Little Hangleton, where the truths he had uncovered about his family would lead directly to murder, another Horcrux, and the destruction of the last fragile connection he had to the ordinary name he had carried since birth. Why did Tom Riddle, after finally discovering the truth about his family, choose murder rather than reconciliation? By the summer after leaving Hogwarts, he possessed the answers he had sought for years. He knew the story of Merop Gaunt. He knew the history of Marvolo and Morphin. He knew that Tom Riddle Sr. had once lived in the grand manor overlooking Little Hangleton. For most people, discovering their origins would bring a sense of closure. For Tom, it produced rage. The facts did not heal an old wound. They gave it a target. Little Hangleton sat quietly among the rolling countryside of Yorkshire. The village church stood near a graveyard where generations of local families had been buried. Above the settlement rose the Riddle house, a large manor that dominated the landscape. To villagers, the Riddles were wealthy and respected. To Tom, they represented something entirely different. They embodied the part of his identity he most despised. Somewhere inside that house lived the father who had abandoned his mother and, in Tom's mind, condemned him to a childhood in Wool's orphanage. The journey back to the Gaunt family shack came first. There Tom encountered Morphin Gaunt, his uncle. Morphin had spent years living in isolation, surrounded by memories of a family already collapsing before Tom was born. The meeting proved decisive. Through Morphin, Tom learned details about Merope that no school record could provide. He also confirmed the identity of his father. Most importantly, he gained access to one of the Gaunt family's greatest treasures, the gold ring that had belonged to Marvolo Gaunt. The ring was far more significant than it appeared. Set into it was a black stone later revealed to be the Resurrection Stone, one of the 3 legendary Deathly Hallows. Neither Tom nor Morphin understood its full history at the time. What Tom did recognize was its connection to ancient bloodlines. The ring linked him to the Gaunts, the Peverills, and ultimately to Salazar Slytherin himself. For someone obsessed with ancestry and symbolic power, it was irresistible. He claimed it as part of his inheritance. Why frame Morphin rather than simply disappear after the murders? The answer reveals how carefully Tom planned his crimes. After leaving the shack, he traveled to the Riddle house. There he murdered Tom Riddle Sr., Thomas Riddle, and Mary Riddle. 3 generations of the family died in a single night. The exact curse used is not explicitly described in the books, but later evidence points strongly toward the killing curse. When the bodies were discovered, villagers found no visible injuries. The deaths seemed impossible to explain through ordinary means. Tom's next step was even colder than the murders themselves. Returning to Morphin, he altered his uncle's memory. Morphin came to believe that he had personally killed the Riddles. Tom then implanted a false confession. When ministry officials investigated, Morphin freely admitted responsibility. The evidence appeared overwhelming. A known wizard with a history of violence confessed to murdering 3 muggles. The case closed quickly. Tom walked away untouched, while his uncle spent the remainder of his life in Azkaban. This was not merely revenge, it was rehearsal. The pattern would repeat throughout Voldemort's future career. Others would suffer the consequences of crimes he committed. Innocent people would become scapegoats. Truth would be buried beneath carefully constructed narratives. Hagrid had already experienced this tactic after the Chamber of Secrets incident. Now, Morphin became another victim. Tom had discovered that controlling a story could be just as powerful as casting a spell. The murders also served another purpose. Canon confirms that Tom used the deaths to create a second Horcrux. The object was Marvolo Gaunt's ring itself. Once again, murder became a tool rather than a moral boundary. Each act of killing damaged his soul further. Yet Tom viewed the process differently. Where others would see mutilation, he saw progress. Every Horcrux represented another step away from mortality. The humanity he sacrificed along the way mattered less and less to him. Why does the ring matter so much in hindsight? Because it connects several of the most important stories in the entire series. The ring carried the Resurrection Stone. It became one of Voldemort's Horcruxes. Decades later, Albus Dumbledore destroyed it, using the Sword of Gryffindor. In doing so, he triggered the curse that eventually led to his own death. One object linked the founders of Hogwarts, the Peverell brothers, Voldemort's rise, and Dumbledore's final year. Yet when Tom first slipped the ring onto his finger, he saw only a symbol of triumph over his past. After the murders, something else changed. Tom increasingly abandoned the identity of Tom Riddle. The name reminded him of a Muggle father he hated. It connected him to an orphanage he wanted forgotten. During his school years, he had already experimented with rearranging the letters of his birth name. Tom Marvolo Riddle could become the phrase, "I am Lord Voldemort." The transformation was more than a clever anagram. It represented a deliberate act of self-creation. Tom was attempting to erase the boy he had been. Around this period, he also began attracting followers more intentionally. Former classmates maintained contact. Young witches and wizards drawn to ambition, status, and dark magic found him increasingly persuasive. These future allies did not yet call themselves Death Eaters. That movement would emerge later. But the foundations were forming. Tom possessed charisma, intelligence, and a remarkable ability to identify people's desires. He could make others feel chosen. He could make them feel important. Few realized they were being shaped into tools. Yet despite everything he'd achieved, he remained unsatisfied. He had discovered his ancestry. He had avenged himself upon his father. He had created multiple Horcruxes. He had escaped punishment. Still, he wanted more. The treasures of the Gaunt family were not enough. The ring alone could not satisfy his growing fascination. with magical relics. Somewhere beyond Hogwarts and Little Hangleton existed objects tied to the greatest figures in wizarding history. Tom intended to find them. To do that, he would take a position that seemed surprisingly ordinary for a wizard of his talents. He would go to work at Borgin and Burke's, a dusty shop in Nocturne Alley where dark artifacts changed hands, and where two treasures connected to Hogwarts founders were waiting for him to arrive. Why would a wizard, powerful enough to become head boy at Hogwarts, choose to work behind the counter of a dark magical shop? On the surface, the decision made little sense. Tom Riddle graduated with exceptional academic results. Professor Slughorn later remarked that he could have pursued almost any path within the Ministry of Magic. Influential witches and wizards admired him. Connections through the Slug Club could have opened countless doors. Yet instead of seeking prestige, he accepted a position at Borgin and Burke's in Nocturne Alley. The choice becomes clearer once you understand what truly interested him. Tom was not searching for a career. He was searching for objects. Nocturne Alley occupied a shadowed corner of magical London, branching away from Diagon Alley like a dark reflection. Shops displayed cursed jewelry, forbidden books, and artifacts whose histories often carried traces of violence. Borgin and Burke's specialized in precisely those kinds of treasures. Customers arrived carrying heirlooms, enchanted relics, and items whose origins were sometimes best left unexamined. For Tom, the shop provided access to a world hidden from ordinary witches and wizards. Every day brought new stories, old families, and forgotten secrets. It was exactly the environment he wanted. Canon describes Tom during this period as handsome, charming, and extraordinarily persuasive. Caractacus Burke himself later recalled how effectively Tom dealt with customers. Wealthy witches trusted him. Elderly collectors welcomed him into their homes. He possessed the rare ability to make people feel understood while revealing almost nothing about himself. This talent became one of his most dangerous weapons. Unlike the terrifying figure he would later become, the young Tom Riddle could still walk into a room and immediately win people's confidence. One customer in particular captured his attention: Hepzibah Smith. Hepzibah was a wealthy descendant of Helga Hufflepuff and an enthusiastic collector of magical antiquities. Through house elf service, family inheritance, and considerable wealth, she had assembled a remarkable private collection. Tom visited her as part of his work for Borgin and Burke's. The meeting seemed routine at first, yet Tom quickly recognized that Hepzibah possessed something far more valuable than gold. She owned artifacts connected directly to Hogwarts founders. The first was Helga Hufflepuff's cup. Small, elegant, and decorated with intricate badger engravings, it represented one of the few surviving possessions of the founder herself. The second object interested Tom even more. It was Salazar Slytherin's locket, an artifact that had once belonged to Merop Gaunt before she sold it in desperation. Through an extraordinary chain of events, the locket had traveled from the Gaunt family into Hepzibah's collection. Tom was staring at an object linked simultaneously to his ancestry and to one of the most famous figures in wizarding history. Why did founder relics matter so much to him? Power alone does not fully explain it. By this stage, Tom had already demonstrated tremendous magical ability. What fascinated him was symbolism. Throughout his life, he sought objects carrying stories larger than themselves. Founder relics connected him to the deepest roots of the wizarding world. They were not merely valuable possessions, they were fragments of history. Turning such items into Horcruxes allowed him to merge his own legacy with theirs. The outcome of Tom's meetings with Hepzibah Smith is one of the clearest examples of his growing ruthlessness. Shortly after showing him the cup and locket, Hepzibah died unexpectedly. Officially, the death appeared to result from accidental poisoning. Her house elf, Hoki, confessed under questioning. Memories were altered. Evidence pointed elsewhere. The pattern feels painfully familiar by now. Like Morphin Gaunt before her, Hoki became another innocent person burdened with responsibility for Tom's crimes. Dumbledore later concluded that Tom murdered Hepzibah and stole both artifacts. The timeline fits. After her death, the cup and locket vanished. Tom himself disappeared from Borgin and Burke's not long afterward. The young employee who had impressed customers with his politeness simply left. When investigators eventually revisited the case decades later, the truth had long been buried beneath false memories and lost opportunities. Yet the evidence remained strong enough for Dumbledore to reconstruct what had happened. The theft marked a major turning point in Tom's transformation. He no longer collected magical objects merely because they interested him. He was assembling a collection with a specific purpose. The diary already existed as a Horcrux. The ring had joined it. Hufflepuff's cup and Slytherin's locket would eventually become Horcruxes as well. Each murder produced another fragment of soul hidden inside an object chosen with extraordinary care. Tom was not acting impulsively. He was constructing something. Why did he vanish after leaving Borgin and Burke's? Canon offers only fragments. Dumbledore described a period lasting several years during which Tom traveled widely and largely disappeared from public view. Reports surfaced from distant countries. Rumors circulated among witches and wizards interested in the dark arts. The details remain intentionally obscure. What everyone agrees upon is the result. When Tom eventually returned to Britain, he looked different. Witnesses struggled to describe the change precisely. The handsome young man remembered from Hogwarts had become less recognizable. His features appeared altered. Something about him felt unnatural. This transformation likely reflected the cumulative effects of repeated soul fragmentation through Horcrux creation. Each act pushed him further from ordinary humanity. The process did not happen overnight. It unfolded gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, until even acquaintances noticed that the charming student they once knew seemed to be fading away. During these missing years, Tom also became increasingly associated with dark magic. He sought knowledge unavailable through ordinary education. Ancient curses, forbidden rituals, obscure magical traditions. These subjects attracted him more strongly than ever. Some readers have suggested that he traveled through parts of Europe, Albania, and other regions gathering rare magical knowledge. The books never provide a complete itinerary, leaving room for speculation. What matters is the destination rather than the route. Every year he spent away from public view carried him further from Tom Riddle and closer to the figure history would remember as Lord Voldemort. Yet one place continued to exert a pull on him stronger than any other. Hogwarts remained the center of his emotional world. The orphanage was gone from his heart. Little Hangleton represented only bitterness. Nocturne Alley served a purpose but held no affection. Hogwarts was different. It was where he had discovered magic, ancestry, power, and purpose. Eventually, he returned there with a request that seemed surprisingly modest. He wanted a teaching position. Specifically, he wanted the Defense Against the Dark Arts post. The request sounded reasonable. The reality behind it was far more complicated. And when he stood once again before Albus Dumbledore, he encountered the one man who still saw exactly what he had become. Why did Tom Riddle return to Hogwarts, asking for a teaching position when he already seemed committed to a path of darkness? At first glance, the request appears almost ordinary. Former students often return to magical institutions as professors. Tom had excelled at Hogwarts. He understood its history better than most scholars. On paper, he looked like an ideal candidate for the Defense Against the Dark Arts position. Yet when he arrived at the castle sometime after his years of travel, he was no longer the young head boy, remembered by many teachers. The transformation had begun to show. The meeting took place in the headmaster's office. At that time, the headmaster was not Albus Dumbledore, but Professor Armando Dippet. Dumbledore remained a senior teacher, already respected throughout the wizarding world. Tom presented himself with the same polished confidence that had served him for years. He expressed admiration for Hogwarts. He spoke of his desire to teach. He suggested that his travels had broadened his magical knowledge. To anyone unfamiliar with his history, the conversation might have sounded entirely sincere. Dippet seriously considered the request. Canon indicates that he respected Tom and recognized his exceptional talent. Yet he ultimately rejected the application. The reason was straightforward. Tom was simply too young. The Defense Against the Dark Arts position carried significant responsibility, and Dippet believed he needed more experience before being entrusted with it. For most applicants, such a refusal would have been disappointing but understandable. Tom reacted differently. Hogwarts had denied him something he wanted. The rejection is important because it highlights a recurring pattern. Throughout his life, Tom expected exceptional treatment. His intelligence justified confidence. His magical ability justified ambition. Yet whenever someone imposed a limit, whether it was Dumbledore forcing him to return stolen items at Wool's orphanage or Dippet denying him a teaching post, he remembered the slight. Not every disappointment became a vendetta, but many did. Refusal often hardened into resentment. Why was Hogwarts so difficult for him to leave behind? The answer goes beyond nostalgia. For Tom, Hogwarts represented belonging. He had entered the castle as a lonely orphan with no clear place in the world. Within its walls, he discovered his magical identity, his connection to Salazar Slytherin, and the first followers who admired him. The school validated everything he believed about himself. Returning as a professor would have allowed him to remain permanently inside the environment he valued most. It would also have given him access to future generations of students. Some readers have suggested that teaching was never his primary goal. According to this interpretation, Tom wanted unrestricted access to Hogwarts itself. The castle contained hidden chambers, magical artifacts, and centuries of accumulated secrets. Even if the teaching position appealed to him, the opportunity to move freely through the school may have been equally attractive. Canon does not confirm this theory outright, but later events make it difficult to dismiss. Hogwarts remained central to many of his plans long after he left. Following the rejection, Tom disappeared once again into the wider wizarding world. These years remain among the least documented periods of his life. Dumbledore later described reports emerging from various regions. Dark magic seemed to follow in Tom's wake. Strange rumors circulated about a growing circle of loyal followers, yet concrete details are scarce. Rowling intentionally leaves much of this period in shadow, allowing listeners and readers to glimpse only fragments of the transformation underway. When Tom eventually emerged again, the changes were impossible to ignore. His appearance had become increasingly unnatural. The handsome young wizard who once charmed professors and wealthy collectors seemed to be fading beneath something colder. His eyes appeared different. His features had grown less human. Dumbledore believed repeated Horcrux creation contributed significantly to this alteration. Every time Tom split his soul, he damaged not only something spiritual, but something visible. The corruption began expressing itself physically. At the same time, his influence continued to expand. Former classmates remained loyal. Younger witches and wizards attracted to power gravitated toward him. Pure-blood families with ambitions of their own found his ideas appealing. The movement still lacked the formal structure it would later possess, but the foundations were unmistakable. Tom was no longer merely gathering acquaintances. He was building a network. These relationships would eventually evolve into the organization known as the Death Eaters. Why did so many people follow him when they could not possibly know the full truth? Charisma provides part of the answer. Tom understood how to speak differently to different audiences. To ambitious, pure-blood families, he emphasized heritage and status. To talented young witches and wizards, he emphasized greatness. To those fascinated by forbidden magic, he offered access to knowledge others feared. Followers rarely see the complete picture. They see the version designed specifically for them. During this period, the name Lord Voldemort began appearing more frequently. The transformation from Tom Riddle to Voldemort was not a single moment, but a gradual replacement. The new name allowed him to shed associations he despised. It severed ties to his Muggle father. It elevated him above ordinary identity. Names possess extraordinary significance throughout the Harry Potter universe. Harry inherits power through names. Sirius Black struggles under the weight of his family name. Tom solved the problem differently. He invented a new one. The anagram itself reveals something interesting about his character. Tom Marvolo Riddle becomes I am Lord Voldemort. The phrase is theatrical. It carries the dramatic flair of someone consciously constructing a legend. Tom did not merely change his name, he staged its creation. Even in private, he seems to have understood the importance of symbolism. The new identity was designed to inspire awe and fear. In time, it would succeed beyond anything he could have imagined. Yet, despite growing influence, hidden Horcruxes, and an emerging reputation within darker corners of the magical world, one obstacle remained unchanged: Albus Dumbledore. From their first meeting in Wool's orphanage onward, Dumbledore had recognized something dangerous in Tom. Others saw brilliance and charm. Dumbledore saw those qualities too, but he also saw what lay beneath them. As Voldemort's power increased, Dumbledore's suspicion deepened. Their relationship would define much of the coming conflict. For now, however, the future Dark Lord continued moving through the shadows, collecting power piece by piece. More Horcruxes would follow, more followers would gather, more secrets would be hidden across Britain and beyond. The boy who once sat alone in a London orphanage was nearly gone. In his place stood a wizard, reshaping himself into something unprecedented, someone who believed he could conquer death, control destiny, and eventually bend the entire magical world to his will. The final stage of that transformation was approaching, and it would leave behind almost nothing of Tom Riddle except the memory of a name few people would ever use again. What exactly happened during the missing years when Tom Riddle vanished and Lord Voldemort emerged? This is one of the great unanswered questions in Harry Potter lore. By design, Rowling leaves much of this period obscured. We see the beginning clearly. A brilliant Hogwarts student, a gifted prefect, a head boy, a young man working at Borgin and Burke's. We see the ending clearly as well. Lord Voldemort surrounded by followers, feared across Britain, pursuing domination through terror and dark magic. Between those points stretches a shadowed chapter where only fragments survive. Dumbledore later described hearing reports from distant corners of the magical world. Tom was traveling, studying, and searching. Unlike ordinary wizards, he was not interested in broad magical education. He already possessed extraordinary knowledge. What he sought were secrets hidden even from most magical scholars, ancient curses, obscure rituals, forgotten branches of dark magic, and methods of extending life fascinated him above all else. Every journey appears to have served the same goal. He was constructing a version of himself that no longer resembled an ordinary human wizard. The physical transformation became increasingly noticeable. When Tom graduated from Hogwarts, many people regarded him as exceptionally handsome. Several characters comment on his appearance during his youth. Yet years later, witnesses describe someone markedly different. His face seemed waxen and altered. His eyes carried a cold intensity. Features that once appeared attractive became unsettling. This change did not happen all at once. It unfolded gradually, likely accelerated by repeated Horcrux creation and years spent practicing magic that pushed beyond normal limits. Why does Voldemort's appearance matter so much? Because in the Harry Potter universe, the soul and the body are not entirely separate. Time and again, the series shows inner choices manifesting outwardly. The Dementors affect physical health through emotional devastation. The killing curse leaves no visible wound, but profoundly alters lives. Horcruxes are perhaps the most extreme example. Splitting the soul repeatedly was never meant to happen. Voldemort treated it as a technical procedure, but the damage accumulated. Eventually, his appearance reflected what had happened beneath the surface. During these years, Founder relics continued to occupy his attention. By this point, he possessed the diary, the ring, Hufflepuff's cup, and Slytherin's locket. Yet he had not finished. Another object remained hidden somewhere within the wizarding world, Rowena Ravenclaw's lost diadem. According to legend, the diadem enhanced the wisdom of whoever wore it. For centuries, its location remained unknown. Even Ravenclaw house students knew only the story. Most believed the artifact had vanished forever. The key to finding it came through another forgotten piece of history. Rowena Ravenclaw's daughter, Helena Ravenclaw, had stolen the diadem long before Hogwarts became the institution later generations recognized. She fled to a forest in Albania, hoping to keep the treasure for herself. Rowena eventually sent a bloody baron to retrieve her. The encounter ended in tragedy. Helena was killed. The baron, horrified by what he had done, took his own life. Their ghosts later returned to Hogwarts as the Grey Lady and the Bloody Baron. At some point during his travels, Tom uncovered this secret. Exactly how remains unknown, but the outcome is confirmed. He located Helena Ravenclaw's ghost at Hogwarts and persuaded her to reveal the diadem's hiding place. This alone demonstrates the remarkable skill he possessed in manipulating others. Helena had concealed the truth for centuries, yet Tom succeeded where countless others had failed. He learned that the diadem was hidden in a forest in Albania. He traveled there and recovered it. Why was Helena willing to trust him? The books never provide a complete answer. Perhaps she saw in him the brilliance she associated with her mother. Perhaps he appealed to her vanity. Perhaps centuries of isolation weakened her caution. Whatever the reason, she later regretted the decision deeply. By the time she understood who Tom had become, the damage was already done. Another founder relic had fallen into his hands. The diadem eventually became another Horcrux. Unlike the diary, which remained active and capable of independent manipulation, or the ring, which Voldemort hid with powerful protections, the diadem followed a different path. He concealed it inside Hogwarts itself, within the Room of Requirement. Specifically, he placed it among generations of hidden objects in the room's vast storage form, often called the Room of Hidden Things. The decision reveals something remarkable. Even after years away, he still trusted Hogwarts more than any other location. Another question emerges here. Did Voldemort genuinely believe nobody else would ever discover the room? The answer appears to be yes. He considered himself uniquely intelligent. Throughout his life, that confidence often served him well. In this case, however, it blinded him. He convinced himself that he alone had uncovered certain secrets. The irony is striking. Thousands of students had used the Room of Requirement before Harry Potter ever entered it. Voldemort's greatest weakness was not ignorance, it was arrogance. Meanwhile, his followers continued to grow in number. The future Death Eaters increasingly organized around his leadership. Families such as the Lestranges, the Rosiers, the Averys, and others became associated with his cause. Some were drawn by ideology, others by ambition. A few were likely captivated by his charisma and reputation. Whatever their reasons, the movement was becoming more structured. Voldemort no longer stood alone. By now, very few traces of the orphan from Wool's orphanage remained visible. The child who had asked Dumbledore whether he was different from other people had received his answer many times over. He was different. He had opened the Chamber of Secrets. He had murdered repeatedly. He had divided his soul. He had assembled relics connected to Hogwarts founders. He had attracted loyal followers. Yet despite all of these achievements, one thing continued to escape him completely. He could not understand love, sacrifice, or genuine human connection. Dumbledore would later identify this limitation as the central flaw in Voldemort's worldview. Tom understood fear, he understood ambition, he understood power, but he never grasped why people would willingly risk themselves for others. That blind spot existed when he was a child at Wool's orphanage. It remained when he became Lord Voldemort, and ultimately it would shape his downfall. Before that downfall, however, one final step remained in the story of Tom Riddle's transformation. The wizarding world would soon stop thinking of him as a talented former student, a mysterious traveler, or an ambitious, dark wizard. He would become something larger and more terrifying, a name whispered in fear across Britain. To understand how completely Tom Riddle disappeared, we must return one last time to the question that haunted him from childhood: whether power could truly replace everything else a person loses along the way. Why did Tom Riddle spend his entire life pursuing power, only to become less and less human with every victory? By the time the wizarding world came to know him primarily as Lord Voldemort, the transformation appeared complete. The brilliant student from Hogwarts seemed gone. The charming young employee of Borgin and Burke's seemed gone. Even the orphan from Wool's orphanage seemed gone. Yet if you follow the story carefully, every stage of Voldemort's rise can still be traced back to the same questions that shaped Tom Riddle's childhood. Who am I? Why was I abandoned? How can I ensure that I am never powerless again? The answers he chose defined everything that followed. When Tom discovered that he possessed magical abilities, he interpreted them as proof of superiority. When he learned that he descended from Salazar Slytherin, he treated ancestry as validation. When he encountered death through the loss of his mother and the fear of his own mortality, he searched for magical ways to escape it. None of these responses were inevitable. Other characters in the series experience loneliness, loss, and uncertainty. Harry Potter grows up without parents. Severus Snape endures a painful childhood. Sirius Black rebels against a toxic family. Yet each makes different choices. Tom consistently chose control over connection. One of the most revealing moments in the entire series comes from Dumbledore's analysis of Voldemort. Dumbledore never claims that Tom was born incapable of making moral decisions. He does not describe him as cursed by fate. Instead, he repeatedly emphasizes choice. The distinction matters. Tom possessed extraordinary gifts. He was intelligent, disciplined, charismatic, and magically powerful. Those strengths could have led him almost anywhere. What transformed him into Voldemort was not talent itself, but the direction in which he aimed it. Why was Dumbledore one of the few people who understood this so clearly? Because he had spent much of his own life confronting similar temptations. Dumbledore knew what it felt like to be exceptionally gifted. He understood ambition. He understood the attraction of power. After the death of his sister Ariana and the collapse of his friendship with Gellert Grindelwald, he spent decades examining the consequences of those desires. When he looked at Tom Riddle, he recognized a path he himself had narrowly avoided. The difference between them was not intelligence, it was wisdom. As Voldemort's influence expanded, the choices made during his youth continued shaping his future. The diary Horcrux created through Myrtle Warren's death returned decades later to possess Ginny Weasley. The ring taken from the Gaunts eventually cursed Dumbledore. Hagrid's wrongful expulsion remained one of the great injustices of Hogwarts history. Morphin Gaunt died believing he had committed murders that were never his. Hepzibah Smith's death lingered as another hidden crime. The past never truly disappeared. It waited quietly until the moment when consequences returned. Another irony sits at the center of Tom Riddle's story. He spent years searching for identity, yet gradually erased the very things that made him unique. His mother, Merope Gaunt, became little more than a source of ancestry. His father became an object of hatred. Friends became followers. Followers became servants. Even his own soul was divided and scattered. In seeking to preserve himself forever, he fractured himself repeatedly. The quest for immortality cost him the wholeness he was trying to protect. Why did Voldemort never understand the power of love, despite encountering its effects again and again? The answer may begin in the orphanage. He never experienced the kind of unconditional affection that shaped Harry Potter through Lily Potter's sacrifice, or Neville Longbottom through his grandmother's devotion. Yet the absence of love does not fully explain the blindness. Many characters endure difficult childhoods without reaching the same conclusions. Tom actively dismissed what he could not control. Love could not be commanded through fear. Loyalty born from affection could not be guaranteed by threats. Because he could not dominate these forces, he underestimated them. This weakness appears repeatedly throughout the series. He fails to understand why Narcissa Malfoy would lie to protect Draco. He fails to understand the depth of Severus Snape's loyalty to Lily Potter. He fails to understand Harry's willingness to sacrifice himself for others during the Battle of Hogwarts. Again and again, Voldemort interprets people through the lens of power because power is the language he knows best. Yet human beings are more complicated than that. Dumbledore sees this clearly. Harry eventually learns it. Voldemort never does. If you return to Wool's orphanage in your mind, the story acquires a different texture. The child sitting alone in that building is not yet Lord Voldemort. He has not opened the Chamber of Secrets. He has not murdered Myrtle Warren. He has not spoken with Slughorn about Horcruxes. He has not traveled to Little Hangleton or stolen the treasures of Hogwarts' founders. None of those events have happened. Yet the questions are already there. The loneliness is already there. The desire for control is already there. The future Dark Lord exists not as a certainty, but as a possibility slowly taking shape. Some readers have long wondered whether Tom Riddle could ever have become someone different. Rowling herself leaves little doubt that he chose his path repeatedly and deliberately. Still, the question persists because the early chapters of his life are so haunting. A brilliant child, an orphan searching for answers, a boy desperate to understand who he is. The tragedy of Tom Riddle is not that he lacked ability. It is that he possessed so much of it and used it to build a prison of his own making. And so the story ends where it began. Rain taps softly against the windows of Wool's orphanage. Somewhere in the building, a young boy lies awake while other children sleep. He does not know about Hogwarts yet. He does not know about Horcruxes, Death Eaters, or prophecies. He knows only that strange things happen around him and that he feels different from everyone else. Beyond the glass, London settles into silence beneath the dark winter sky. The years ahead will carry him through ancient chambers, hidden relics, murders, betrayals, and wars. But for this quiet moment before the name Voldemort exists, there is only Tom Riddle listening to the rain and wondering who he will become. If you look closely at the life of Tom Riddle, you begin to notice that this is not really a story about dark magic. Dark magic is only the language through which the deeper story is told. At its heart, this is a story about fear. Not the fear of monsters, curses, or war, but the fear of being powerless, forgotten, abandoned, and ordinary. Nearly every major decision Tom makes can be traced back to that fear. He collects trophies because he wants proof of control. He seeks ancient bloodlines because he wants proof that he matters. He creates Horcruxes because he cannot bear the thought that one day he might disappear. The tragedy is that each attempt to escape fear only binds him more tightly to it. What makes Rowling's world feel so convincing is that magic never replaces human nature. Instead, it magnifies it. Harry and Voldemort are both orphans. Both discover extraordinary abilities. Both grow up without parents to guide them. Yet the same world produces two completely different people because their responses to suffering are different. Harry experiences pain and learns empathy. Tom experiences pain and learns domination. The magic around them changes countless details, but it never removes the importance of choice. Again and again, the series returns to the idea that what a person becomes is shaped less by what happens to them than by what they decide to do afterward. There is also a quiet irony running through Tom Riddle's entire life. He spends years searching for identity and belonging, yet every step he takes pushes those things further away. He rejects his father, he reduces his mother to a symbol of ancestry, he turns friends into followers and followers into instruments. Even his own soul becomes something he cuts apart and scatters. The more power he gains, the less connected he becomes to anything real. By the time he calls himself Lord Voldemort, he has acquired relics, secrets, armies, and fear, but he has lost almost every ordinary human bond that gives life meaning. He wins many of the battles he chooses to fight, yet quietly loses the thing he was truly searching for from the beginning. That is why Dumbledore serves as such an important counterpoint throughout this story. Both men understand greatness. Both possess extraordinary intelligence. Both know the temptation of power. Yet one learns that power is safest when restrained, while the other believes power exists only to be expanded. One accepts mortality as part of life. The other wages war against it. One places faith in loyalty, friendship, and sacrifice. The other trusts only fear. The conflict between them is not merely a battle between good and evil. It is a disagreement about what gives a human life value. Perhaps that is why the image of the orphanage remains so powerful, even after everything that follows. The Chamber of Secrets, the Horcruxes, the murders, the hidden relics, and the rise of the Dark Lord all grow from that quiet beginning. The story reminds you that destinies do not usually arrive fully formed. They begin as habits, beliefs, wounds, and choices repeated over many years. The child becomes the student becomes the seeker becomes the conqueror. By the time the transformation is complete, it can feel inevitable, even though it never truly was. And so, as the night settles around you, the great castles and ancient prophecies fade into the distance. The Death Eaters have not gathered, the wars have not begun, the name Voldemort has not yet been spoken. There is only a narrow bed in Wool's orphanage, rain whispering against the window pane, and a dark-haired boy lying awake in the silence. Beyond the glass, London sleeps beneath the winter sky. Inside, a child listens to the falling rain. and the future waits patiently in the darkness.